given the triangulation of COVID, Black Lives Matter, climate crisis. There's a whole range of other market issues that are impacting upon art and public spaces and biennales and triennals. So in many ways, in 2020, the circuit of biennales and triennals has come to a standstill. Most are deferred. It is an opportunity for the hosts and organizers to stop, reflect, re-envision the future of the way they engage with their main purpose. The plethora of these biennales and triennals of contemporary art has reached a plateau, if you will, or existential crisis even before the pandemic disruption. Three elements constitute the state of play: paucity of resources, people competing for limited cake, if you will; contextuality, that is balancing the global hegemonic discourse aesthetic with the integrity of the host agency. And we have to discuss these three outstanding thinkers with us today. Bose Krishnamachari. I'm not going to read out their bios or so on, because we found that almost everyone who joins our webinars Googles the panelists. So people would have seen who Bose Krishnamachari, the founding president of Kochi-Muziris Biennale, is, and Professor Ute, Professor Dr. Ute Bauer. I've seen her work in different parts of the world, and she's curated many biennales, and Gina Fairley, who is Arts Hub's National Visual Arts editor with extensive experience in Southeast Asia and other parts of the world. And she comes from Australia. So it's nice to have a fellow Australian, Gina. I'm really happy about that. But before we start, I just want to, because people are still logging in, I just want to mention that I recently came across. So thanks to the Biennale Foundation webinar, I learned about the East Europe Biennale Alliance. It's comprising of the Biennale matter of Art Prague, Biennale Warsaw, which Kiev Biennale, of Biennale Budapest. And they established it before COVID-19 to shape new forms of international solidarity, expand the socio-political imagination, and develop alternative cultural strategies. By connecting aesthetics and politics in a strategic manner, the Biennale Alliance aims to propose a new narrative of East European region and redefine the way cultural institutions collaborate. So, people have already been thinking about different ways of biennales and triennals. And let's see, I'm going to go to, my dear friend Bose Krishnamachari first. Bose, with Kochi-Muziris Biennale, what an amazing biennale that you and your colleagues have established. But, I remember Okwe Envazar, who has been, I think, second or third Biennale, I can't remember, but you knew him, and Uta knows him quite well. Okwe Envazar saying to me at the International Curators Forum that the Kochi-Muziris Biennale is in par with the Venice Biennale. He's really, I'm not saying that it has to be in par, but that's how we regarded the Kochi-Muziris Biennale. How are you dealing with, this pandemic situation, whether it is reworking the dates, reworking artists and their arrangements, sponsors, and so on and so forth. How are you dealing with it, Bose? You got your 8 minutes. You can say whatever you want to say.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this amazing colleagues. Ute and Gina, of course, Amarji. It's great to be here. But coming back to your question, it sounds very simple, but it's one of the most important questions asked by everyone nowadays. How deal this new time, new spaces, especially when it comes to Biennale, the site of learning, that space you need to have physical presence. We are all, we are all looking at different strategies, different possibilities, how we could put together a new biennial, new ways of seeing. I think our, fortunately or unfortunately, I would say that, my curator, our curator, Shubhigi Rao got, her research work was already completed. The last destination was Sydney, Biennale Sydney. And now she's back in Singapore. I think after that, she hasn't gone anywhere. So sitting in Singapore and we were also thinking about our biennale, wanted to start on 12th of December. We are already, the first edition onwards, we've been holding on that day, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 14, and 16 and 18. Unfortunately, we made a decision in beginning of October that we will extend the show or postpone the show. I don't know which word to be used there. To this year, November, 1st of November or 11th of November. We haven't really confirmed the date. It's economically, when you ask, it's really a disaster in many ways. Our supporters, most of the supporters, except, there are a few really believe in this project, long-term relationship. The first corporate was associated with us was BMW. And then, still continue our relationship with, I can't believe that, from Munich to Kochi, the relationship, how it happened. But, that's consistently sustaining really greater manner we associate with BMW. And the CSR funds being cut, corporate social responsibility, funds in most of the companies are in India, most of them are given to prime ministers, whatever it is called. That was, I don't know, many people have the problem. Already they have a prime minister's funds. Why people wanted again, grabbing their CSR funds? So culture has been the last thing anyways in India, it's only 0.1% is being spent for a culture. Recently, there are some webinars I was attending, and there is one person appointed to study the cultural mapping and how cultural institutions, cultural personalities, and artists and art institutions can put together a better perspective, better creative world. Hopefully, things can be different in future. But coming back to this biennial situation in India, and I think it is important to have collaborations, or collaborative collective efforts to talk about each other's potential. We have it in India, photo festival in Chennai, a fantastic, they just started a couple of years ago, and then Serendipity in Goa, and then in Delhi art fair, or of course, when it comes to Biennale and art fair, it's quite different. As you know, there is a market side, and the Biennale is working for the cutting edge practices and exhibition spaces. So there's a kind of extremities are there, but needs to collectively we have to work. I think there is a kind of momentum. Even the galleries are also coming together. There's a different kind of perspective on the online relationships also built up by the galleries and Biennales. It's a different kind of perspective, but we really have that kind of, I think we have to really build up a new schools of thinking, new spaces for site for learning. I think that's very important. It's, of course, we have to keep the social distancing, but I think, physical presence is always important, So our Kochi Biennale Foundations, one of the vertical is called Students Biennale, which will open on 3rd of March. 3rd of March will be, that is going to be online. But parallelly, we are applying to, when the main Biennale happens, we are planning to bring them back as a kind of physical model. Biennale Foundation works at 365 or year-long program, but most of the programs are now online, like ABC Art by Children. The Biennale Foundation's work is, when it comes to, like our focus is here, it's Biennale or, cultural festivals like that. I think, I'm not making a point that, it is very important that this collective effort to see new perspective with the time. Yeah, with that note, maybe I can come back with other trends. Yeah. We could exchange our ideas and, maybe have some debates on that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bose. You mentioned Shobhegi. The last stop was Sydney Biennale. And maybe I might change the order we're going to do this, because Gina has been talking about the Sydney Biennale. Gina, how did you go with the Sydney Biennale? I mean, sort of, it stopped and it started, and yeah.
Well, as a journalist visiting the Biennale's media preview, we were there and kind of having a giggle that we all had to do elbow pumps and hand sanitizer. 10 days later, the Biennale closed down for 3 months. So it was kind of a very sharp new reality that kicked in very quickly. And within a couple of weeks, the Biennale itself had to adjust, and it got its online program up and happening within just 2 weeks. What's actually really interesting about it getting up, is that okay? Getting up online is, I'm getting feedback.
Bose, okay? Could you mute can others mute their mics, please? I'll mute mine too.
So while Australia has had a very light footprint in terms of the pandemic, our restrictions have been really tight. So, 5 cases and a city might go into lockdown for a week, which is causing all sorts of other chaoses. When the Brooks Andrews 2020 Biennale pivoted online, it was celebrated for many things, of course, one being its First Nations embrace and those conversations, which was long overdue in Australia. But the closure actually was just as interesting as the physical exhibition at the end of the day. Neri Weir, they branded it, and there was new content rolled out daily for 10 weeks. So nearly 600 new events were actually rolled out over the period of the exhibition with a reduced exhibition team. So every Tuesday, teachers, students, families from all over the world could tap in and learn about Neri, the exhibition, from an environmental perspective, about Indigenous histories and cultures. And as a result, that digital visitation spiked to 4 million in that short period of time. What was also really interesting is that 36% of that digital audience came from international engagement, which is far more than the history of the exhibition could ever attract from a global audience. And social media locally, of course, spiked as well when that physical activity was curtailed. So it wasn't only reach, but it was engagement through comments, which went up about 600-700% than what had been expected in the past. So while those little dives demonstrate that the traditional model was actually in the past very mono-leveled, and what we've moved into is quite a layered engagement. And I think that is something that might stick moving forward. And another interesting statistic that came out of the Biennale of Sydney was that when it did actually get up and start rolling again 3 months later, 33% of the people that visited considered it was a safe place to visit, a safe COVID space. So for me, I started to wonder, you know, how much of that was because the Biennale stayed connected and kept engaging that audience in those off moments and building stronger loyalties, rather than that kind of seasonal cyclic thing that we've, you know, that the more traditional model of the Biennale promotes. So I think that's something that possibly can be extracted moving forward. And then when you start to fold that into the idea of the hyperlocal, and I'm not talking hyperlocal so much as exhibiting local artists or national quotas, etc., but the hyperlocal visitor experience, increasingly we're seeing us moving away from those sort of spectacular arsenale models to a sort of a cycle of spot fires across a city. And again, that sort of that's not a new idea, but it's being reinvented really quickly about how engagement and can be rethought and reignited, shall we say, in a model that's sort of become a bit stale and formulaic. And the other thing is, I think we've become, you know, looking at these social media trends and these online digital trends, we've also been cognizant that today audiences are a lot more, shall we say, event-driven, an event-driven society. So how we're looking at that foot traffic and how it's mapped out as attendance is becoming a little bit more knitted to public programming and online offerings as well. So we're also starting to see a greater stretch to satellite cities. For example, the Sydney Biennale in its last edition stretched to Campbelltown and Parramatta, cities that are over an hour away from the CBD of Sydney. And what that's actually doing is they're almost handing over a kind of ownership or authorship of that event with local communities outside the nucleus of the core Biennale of the past. And I think that works for Australia because we're so distant geographically, and it removes that sort of isolationist tendencies and makes for a more embedded Biennale that people can connect with. My provocative question, however, is, does it become too diluted because of that? And, you know, do we err then on becoming a little bit too nationalistic or too fractured? And then do we start to face another whole set of problems like a quagmire of local politics within institutions and governments and funding, because we're sort of, shall we say, flattening out that international engagement? So yeah, there's a few questions to think about there. I certainly think that today's pandemic has brought connectivity and community into sharper focus. And it's confirmed that we can work in different ways and that there's value in working in unexpected ways. And that, you know, if anything, we've become a little bit too complacent in our past models. And not only, you know, everyone's asking, how do we reinvent this? But I think what's probably the more realistic question is, you know, there's going to be some natural attrition that happens as the numbers fall away across the calendar as a, you know, outcome of the pandemic. The question then remains is, what determines the strengths in a Biennale to survive? And I think we're still working out that one. For me, I think it lies very strongly in sustainability and what sustainability looks like. And it's interesting, actually, just this week, I received a notice from the inaugural Helsinki Biennale, which opens later this year. I think it's June. And they're claiming to offer an alternative framework for biennales in the post-pandemic world. They say they're going to do that by ecological ethics and radical empathy, and to become carbon neutral, and to measure the Biennale's carbon footprint across categories like waste, purchases, energy consumption, logistics, and mobility. And these are things that the incoming Biennale of Sydney curator Jose Roca, Colombian curator Jose Roca, is also embracing. And he says his philosophy is that from now on, we really need to build upon what is already built, rather than trying to constantly reinvent a new wheel. He's already in Sydney, 2 years out. He's eliminated international travel. And let's face it, that's one of the perks of the job in the Biennale environment. But he's made that commitment already to strengthen the curatorium and to, really work in a, kind of brains trust collaborative making way to shift that authorship a little bit. And so it's less tightened around one curator and perhaps a little bit more franchised. I think it's a really interesting way of thinking that sort of, it's not new, but it's pushing what we know further. And I think we're at the stage where we definitely need to, break open the kernel, really. So they're little tweaks, but they offer massive change. Jose Roca is saying that, he is going to look at recycling and repurposing materials, that he's looking at local production and the reproductions of works here in Australia rather than freighting. And rather than sort of choosing a fabulous artist and then inviting them to make a new Biennale project, to rather to work on projects that are already on the table and actually materialize them and actuate them. So yeah, that's sort of what's going on this end.
Thanks, Gina, for taking us to Sydney and the perspectives and the critical analysis that you gave and the changes that are taking place. For the audience, participants, I also want to mention that Sydney, so New South Wales, the state where Sydney is, was one of the first, I think, in Australia to have a statewide program for dealing with art and revolve kind of idea, sort of from waste and recycling waste and art. In fact, Karen Parosen was the manager of it. Her father was the founding director of Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney. And so that's great. And I couldn't help thinking, sort of as you were speaking, as much, I love Sydney and I really miss the Sydney Biennale, that Bose, who is dealing with, if you go to Fort Kochi or Kochi, it's a much smaller population. Fort Kochi is the size of Hoi An in central Vietnam. And yet, it's the programming, the educational engagement, and it's incredible, the kind of network. That's sustainability over there. I mean, I couldn't help thinking about it because you said sustainability. So Bose and his team have been thinking about sustainability in local engagement. And of course, the international engagement is continuing, like in Sydney. So this is wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm sure there are a lot of questions that are going to come. Ute, you've been curator, co-curator of so many biennales and so much experience. I mean, are you there, Ute?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi.
I'm listening.
Yeah, given your incredible experience and passion and commitment for social justice that we all admire in you. And I think you and Okwe are some of the ones who started this whole discourse of contemporary art and, social justice. Given that Black Lives Matters intersects so much with climate crisis and COVID-19, all the three, there's a triangulation. And the kind of situation that you see with your enormous experience in rethinking, in repositioning, Gina mentioned about Indigenous engagement. How much do you think are people prepared to engage with social justice issues. Because if you look at museums, a lot of the big museums are going back 20, 30 years, getting away from their commitment to issues of return, repatriation, restitution, or even community engagement because they have the money, you know, and even if they're diminished, they still have it. So do you think, what's going to happen with biennales and triennals? Do you think the social justice dimension will continue, or do we have to rethink it?
I think it depends where you are, like what you can do. I mean, it was amazing to see, as Gina said, and I was fortunate, it was my first Sydney Biennale, and I made sure I go because particular because of Brooke Andrews addressing and curating it from the perspective of First Nation, First People, and bringing together international voices. So it was not a local or like a national biennale addressing the conflict within the country, but rather sharing the situation of First Nation people and indigenous communities around the globe and creating those solidarities. And I think biennales for me are still hubs. And this is why I don't think for me they would function online. Because I mean, what is really the critical point is like bringing people together, like bringing people from outside, meeting local people. And I'm not saying something shouldn't be shared online. I mean, I think that's important, and it gives much more access also at the places where the artists are coming from, and they can basically participate in this. So that's, I'm not saying that shouldn't be the case, but I think it's, I mean, we're working at the moment in Istanbul and nobody can go there, neither us nor the artists. And one of the artists who is actually from the Pacific, she said like, she just cannot relate to the place. And I think it's very difficult to create a work, or as Gina said, like to produce something on site. If you have never been there, you don't know the place, you don't know the people. I mean, we're not instant curators who can send a meal to whoever desires it anywhere on the globe. So I think this understanding of a place and trying to interact and the wish to interact, I don't think that functions via the screen. So I think that we also have to see what does function and what doesn't. And of course, we all had to bring our content online because we still wanted to give the artists the opportunity to be seen, or like the programs that were made, that they're accessible. But I have the feeling, without being parochial or so, that the communities on site need us more than ever. Like, because there's not so much money anymore left, and economies is struggling. Funding is getting reduced because governments have to focus on the downside of the economic situation. And so I think culture is always the area that is stripped first because it's seen as a luxury, although we think it's very essential and at the core also of, as you said, like not only social justice, but like to really for giving people voices. And artists and other cultural practitioners usually have an incredible antenna to sense the wound in a society and put the finger in the wound. And so I think we need this local interference. Like, so it's great to be on a message to the globe, but I think it's also important to still not give up, to work into the community, to bring a new perspective to the place. And I agree, I mean, what Jose Roca says, and I think actually most biennales do that. They create, maybe not Venice or so, because creation in Venice is terribly expensive and there's no space. But I think most biennales try to work on site. They try to include also local craftsmanship, like really to have the community contributing by being a part of it, being a patron of it. And I think that also creates connections beyond the walls or like the confines of a biennale. You meet people from outside when you produce and you can engage. So I think that is, I think, the way to go. And museums have to collect works, but Biennale can generate exchanges, context, and also innovation and new experimentation for the artists, that to leave their comfort zone to work in a new context. And But I think what is important, Biennales also have become institutions. They are no more the experimental spots. We saw them. Actually, OCWI, we were not the first one. OCWI always looked to Gerardo Mosquera's Havana Biennale from 1984. And when the Global South suddenly claimed we are on the map too, we also have artists, we also have something to say, and we say it from our perspective at our place. And if you want to see it, you better come. So I think there is also something to say, yeah, you should also see how we live, the context where we're in. And I think that under this lens, you also see the works in a different way. And I think that's also something very important to learn about a place, to learn political differences, social differences. And I think that's, I think, very crucial. And I think also, unfortunately, Gina, not all the Biennales can afford to cover the life expenses of their curators, because in many countries they don't have the funding and people wouldn't be able to leave their place. But I agree, it's important that curators can immerse themselves in a context, understanding the local, and then really bringing their perspective into the site. It's very difficult if one is parachuted in. So I totally agree. But as I said, like, many cannot afford that. But I think what is really important is to see that Biennales, who have become institutions, have an incredible muscle memory. And if your muscle memory is stuck to one position, it's very hard to change the gear. And so I think it's a new challenge often for the curators, because it's not just that the administration or the core team of a Biennale has a muscle memory, but the funders. As you said, they expect, oh, 4 million now online? Oh, we hope the next Biennale is topping this. So there is this pressures of numbers. And when we propose, for example, for Istanbul to really radically reduce the number of projects, because it's very difficult to prepare online when everybody always is on the screen, to reduce the number, of course, there comes the anxiety. Will the visitors still be there? Then we have social distance, then less works. Will our funders go with this? We thought like we will reactivate the city, maybe it helps with tourism. So there is incredible pressure also around Biennales, like they're not like steady streams, there are culminating moments, they're having a climax where they really have to bring in the audience, the attention, etc. So if we say we have to slow down and we have to rather work carefully, sustainably within a community, but also maybe with the communities from where the artists coming from, we have to change expectations. And I think that is a big challenge for many Biennales, because they're so dependent on so many factors. You're muted.
By the way, to the participants, if you have questions, please post them in the question and answer box. They'll be culled and then we will address them. But Ute, so glad you mentioned the Havana Biennale, because very few people of the current younger generation realize that, in fact, when Venice Biennale refused to have indigenous art, saying that it's either primitive art or it's not art, it's Havana Biennale, which was the site for indigenous artists. I mean, I still remember Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney, you know, with Fiona Foley and John Mundine going to Havana Biennale. It provided the space for people, for First Nations people all over the world. And of course, you know, sort of once Dr. Gerard McMaster started curating and as a First Nations person at Venice Biennale, there was a kind of opening. But there is a kind of cultural amnesia. You know, we forget the significance of Havana Biennale in opening up spaces for the global South. And it worries me, but on that note, what you said is so true and so disturbing, that governments see culture as, you know, not a priority. Because we went through in the 90s in Australia, thanks to Canadian statistics, believe it or not. They helped us with the methodologies and everything from Canada. We went through what we call cultural industry strategy. We started systematically looking at the contribution of culture to the economy and argued by 1994 or 5, I think, that culture contributes $13 billion to Australian economy. It's gone up substantially since then. So we made an argument, and so like Great Barrier Reef, Marine Park Authority, $7 billion contribution. Conservation is good business. That's the kind of argument we made. And, but what happened over there is somebody wonderful, brilliant scholar, David Throsby, with cultural economics, looked at the qualitative side, using choice modeling, contingency evaluation, the qualitative side of understanding cultural statistics, not just the quantitative, but the qualitative. That helped us in Australia. It helped in Italy. It helped in many other parts of the world where they actually followed this kind of paradigm. But again, it's a cultural amnesia. People have forgotten, that how does one value culture qualitatively, not just quantitatively. I think governments have forgotten. And that's very disturbing, especially given the current pandemic situation. So once again, how do biennales as sites of cultural memory deal with cultural amnesia? That's a question that keeps on bothering me a lot. But Bose, I think you had some questions, comments. You finished up by saying that. Unmute, Bose.
No, I mean, it's nice to hear some words like muscle memory. I would like to know what.
So true.
Yeah, it's really interesting. But I believe that, the sustainability of a biennale, the site, how the site become sustainability can be used in sites. When I look at the architectural spaces, heritage spaces in Kerala, especially the Kochi-Muziris area, and it's a 4.5 square kilometer area, how in a way that space is converted into converting for the biennial time, and again and again the same site transform into new forms. But is it, like just, I believe if we, in present situation, it's almost like looking from the deck of Kochi to other part of the world. When Jiddish Kallat was curating, he said something like this, looking outside from the site itself. But when we were, Riaz and myself was curating, it was almost like a mirror. Kochi was like a mirror which was receiving everything from the other part of the world. And in Sudarshan taken another level. And Anita plays differently with the, but the sites become activated with the local participation. I think what is important is, we always accepted the other. It's not just the local. We always received the other from, in every sense, whether it is food or culture or like religion, all of them. When we take the history, Kerala has that kind of, it's a kind of ideal place to live in, first mosque or first church or first synagogue, all that. I keep repeating this because I believe that. So when it comes to Biennale setting up, that location is already prepared, the soil is already prepared. So it's in some ways, in this new situation, how we could plant a seed in such a place. I think I don't believe in just going back to the roots. I believe that receiving the other is always an important aspect. That physical receiving is also always important. That's a physical hug is always important. I believe that embracing each other is important. And I believe that empathy developed from the land itself is, in some ways working on. I am really looking forward to Shubiki's edition, the forthcoming edition, 5th edition of the Kochi Biennale. When I was looking at my friend Brooke Andrews' Biennale, unfortunately I could not fly. I could not see that, but I was very happy to see online stuff. Also look at we had the first in 2012. We organized the Google Art and Culture initiated the first temporary project to the public. It was kind of first time online exhibition was 360 of recorded stuff was put it on to the public. Still, you could I believe that the effect of online is how far it can be sensitized or how it can provoke or embrace or something like that. I don't believe that. I think the physicality is always important. How we make it physical presence, physical exhibition is an important aspect. So I think science will help. Technology will definitely need it to be added, learned, kept. In that sense, I think new ways of adapting science or creating situations for it's almost like kind of acupuncture. You need to bring that kind of sciences to add to make the site revibrate or resurrect. I believe, yeah.
Thanks, Bose. Otef. Yeah.
No, I just want to say, because I agree with both of you, also with Gina. I think what was amazing. I mean, when we had the privilege and the opportunity to be in Sydney, and so many indigenous artists came together, and they don't have so often the opportunity to be all together. I think they have very strong networks because they have to be in solidarity with each other, but to be physically together is also expensive. And I think the Biennales can also exactly serve as this opportunity when they can afford to bring the people together, that they can also meet each other and exchange. And I don't get me wrong, I was really also glad that so much could go online, and because they had worked so hard to bring this all together, and then to shut down after 10 days after working so tirelessly for so long, and it became obvious they had such a program. So I think it was amazing that could go online, and it had then this feedback. So I think it's also so well deserved. But I'm just saying that the pressure, sometimes there comes the pressure. So next time it also should be online, it should be on site, but also online. And there should be a film program, and then there should be talks, and then there should be multiple publications. And the money usually doesn't get more. So I'm just saying, if we want to have also the team sustainable of Biennales and the thinking that is required to think a Biennale, I think we can have all of this, but we cannot have massive quantities of it. I think we really should allow Biennales to really, also some who have less money work on smaller scope. We still should pay attention, because I see the same happening otherwise to Biennales, what happened to institutions, like the big flagship institutions, often in their locale. The funding for the smaller ones goes away because they cannot have the audience. They cannot say, we attract the same people. Then governments often say, oh, well, this institution also runs programs. They have a good education program. They have lectures. So do we need all of these smaller institutions? And so I think if of course, with 360 Biennales, and probably today it's 400 or more, you cannot have attention to each of them internationally. And those who don't catch international attention also get less funding internationally, you make a decision. I also have been working as a funding body in Norway, and you have to make a decision. Do I give the money to here or to there? Because you also don't have endless money. And so I think it's really important to support the ecosystem, and to especially, I think it's interesting what you said, Amareswar, that the Eastern European Biennale is looking, how can they strengthen each other? How can they create a network and support each other, maybe also in promotion and in audience outreach, etc. So I think that also is something very important. And we shouldn't also forget Sydney, actually, and Sao Paulo. They started not as competition to Venice. They started because they said Venice is so far from where we are, like from Latin America and from Australia. And Sydney actually brought works from the Venice Biennale to Australia, which was very sustainable in that sense. So I think it's also, can we share, you know, like productions? Can we show things? Is it this demand? It has to be new. It has been shown already in another Biennale, but the local audience might not have seen it. And so I think it's also to be maybe producing together, you know, like sharing those costs and bringing something that can be produced at one place, because there is the craft, there is the technique, and that can be shown elsewhere, and we're learning from this. So I think the artists are usually very resourceful, but can we be as resourceful as this, as organizers and as institutions, and give up that we always have to be unique, better, different, etc.? Can we say, no, we work together?
Mm. Well said, Ruta. That's great. Gina, do you want to add?
Oh, I just want to sort of tandem with your comments, Anuta's. I agree. There's a total danger in data and sort of hanging these events on that reporting, and because they are cyclical, they fall into funding reporting cycles, which are really dangerous. And as you were saying, Emma, you know, that qualitative data, that's really long-term, long-track data. Mm. You know, it's not going to fall into a two-year cycle. So, you know, I think the thing that actually really hinders are those mechanics of funding and reporting. And as funding goes, you know, those traditional or sort of more Western models will actually be, rather being looked to, we'll be looking to other in finding, you know, other ways that biennales are actually operating successfully in, you know, sort of different ways. And I think, as you were saying, Uta, you know, that muscle memory, you know, and that sort of having to really push and change and resist against those expectations, I think is our greatest challenge, really, for the future. And it's just going to be harder to, as you say, when, you know, we've got to get that balance between the physical and the alternate experience. It can't be one or the other. And I think it's going to take a while to find that sweet spot of what actually sustains the physical connection that these incredible platforms offer artists and arts professionals. But at the same time, you know, that their visibility is extended and the kind of interaction is not hindered by geography also in the physical visits. So, you know, I'm optimistic. I think the future is actually bright, even though our dollars are probably going to, you know, hurt us terribly. But at the same time, you know, we recognize, as Bose was saying, you know, empathy is something that, and social justice, social messaging, these are, you know, frameworks that are so prescient today and urgent today that we can no longer ignore them. We have to actually embrace these things in our workspaces, in our exhibitions, in our everyday. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I mean, I'm getting the messages not in the Q&A box, but on my WhatsApp. So this is a global network of WhatsApp. First one is, somebody responding to Ute's comment about the network of indigenous artists and the level of participation. And the question, I think, is to Gina, to what extent is this because Sydney has been a site of resistance for indigenous people? And this question to Bose is most biennales, they talk about big cities, and Kochi-Muziris Biennale is Fort Kochi, Matangeri area. And the question is, how did you pick, Kochi, Fort Kochi as a site, Matangeri as a site for the Biennale? I mean, in fact, Bose, it reminds me in 1990, I chaired a national seminar, site for a museum or museum for a site, because there was so much controversy about the siting of the National Museum of Australia. I think we could have one for site for a Biennale or Biennale for a site, kind of debate and discussion. The question to Ute is, I think it's coming actually from Turkey. So there you go. They're saying that, look, so much of the discourse centering around dissent, protest, cultural justice is happening, but it's very often very quickly marginalized. It's shared by the converted. Do you think you could make it more global through your work with Istanbul Biennale? I mean, people really want to read this, want to learn from the kind of evolving global discourse in this area. So those are three questions to three of you that have come in. So who wants to go first? I think Gina, you go first.
Sure, mine's easy, quick. In terms of First Nations and the Biennale of Sydney, what Brooke Andrew did with that exhibition was to actually locate the conversations that haven't been had here within an international context and community of First Nations and First Peoples. And that, for us as Australians, that was just groundbreaking to actually expand that conversation. And at the same time, it was like an accordion. It contracted it to something very small that was shared. Sharing was the key to all of it. Sharing knowledge, but also sharing listening and slow listening. From a local perspective, there's another festival of Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander art called Tanandi, which is presented by the Art Gallery of South Australia. It's not within the sort of Biennale and Triennale environment, but it is a festival celebration. It happens every year. The off year is a major citywide exhibition, and it brings Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from all over the nation together. And that has been pivotal in, not only, as Uta was saying, those communities of actually having that time on the ground together when they're so geographically separated in such a vast country. But it also, it's an incredible catalyst for contemporary making and contemporary conversations. And to be exposed to that within their own community of making as First Nations people is, it's just been an incredible success. And it's a very, very strong model for moving forward here in Australia.
Thanks, Gina. Bose.
I believe small is all. She's small, but it's almost like a melting pot of everything, melting pot of all kinds of culture. And like when we look at, I said, earlier also mentioned 4.5 square kilometer area, got 44 different community lives. And when we were thinking about the Biennale, there was no Muziris was not in the table. Muziris was, vanished in 1341, which was the oldest port, recently excavated maybe 10 years ago, 35 kilometers from Kochi. Kochi is also got a kind of, it's almost like an umbilical relationship with the Muziris and Kochi. Kochi become the active place. And the 44 different kind of community lives in this area. These people are from different, and also the food culture and everything when I look at it. Even the art scene, when I look at Kerala, smaller galleries, small cafes, there is a kind of internationalism or cosmopolitanism within the space itself. Kashi Art Gallery is one of the most interesting example, or Dravidia, which was one of the first gallery, but it's been sustained for a long time. But there is a place created for conversations. There were these smaller spaces really made the larger kind of platform for many others. I think, like you look at 16 languages people speak in this small city, and I can speak. I can meet a Maharashtrian who speaks at home Marathi, and but at the shop he speaks in Malayalam. So that's kind of in Gujarati food. You can get it on the streets, and you can. There is a kind of acceptance, as I mentioned. Receiving, and Kochi is always like that. And by destiny, I believe in destiny, not God-given blessings. It is like your passion to do things, and it comes on your way. I met a man called Mr. M.A. Baby, Miriam Alexander Baby, who really made this biennial happen. In some ways, he came to see me in Mumbai over conversations. He was the education minister. And also when I talk about education in India, no CSR people talk about art as kind of educational aspect. They never mention art never comes into that. But in the early years in 1947, 48, Nehruvian period, the first education minister was instrumental in some ways setting up cultural institutions with the vision of Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. But people, this has been separated. The culture department was separated from culture ministry, is separated from education in the later period. So culture doesn't have a space anyways now in the economic part of it when the national planning comes or state planning comes. Kerala has been exceptionally important, exceptionally different. People like Mr. Baby or Mr. Thomas Isaac, now he's setting up a fantastic 24 museum projects in Alleppey. I would like all of you to meet up with him. And it's a great man. He's a great man to share. And I'm sure these kind of opportunities definitely will come to Alleppey. Alleppey is also known as Venice of the East. And there are a lot of canals, and it's almost like it's only planned city the first planned city in Kerala. So there's going to be a major exhibition, and also looking at all Kerala. The first film festival has originated or started in Trivandrum by Adur Gopalakrishnan, a legendary filmmaker. So the film festival, they have theater festival in Trichy, and now there are literature festival like in Sharjah Book Fair. There is some fantastic literature festival. You can beat, maybe Jaipur Literature Festival. I don't want to compare, but you can see there is a kind of elitism in one side, other side you can see it's kind of camaraderie, people coming together. That's what's happening in Kochi as well. I think that location creating is, maybe there is a kind of different soil, different kind of space everywhere when you travel from Kasaragod to Trivandrum. You experience there is a green land with the 44 river passing through. Maybe it's that liquid form or a fluid form created mind. So it's kind of, the land itself is maybe, someone said politically also this place is known for, green, red made Kerala green. So it's kind of political communist reading or working. So it's also reflected in people's mind. Yeah, I think Kochi is economically different than any other city. It's a capital for in some ways economic capital, you can say, when you look at Kerala. Yeah, so with that, small is all. I believe that small place has lots of sociological element. You can really study every day. You can find new fragrance, new ways of odor. Yeah.
Now we're all moving to Kerala, I said. It's wonderful. Before I go over to Ute, there's one more question to you, Bose. This has come from the Northeast. I think the place, Manipur. This has come from Manipur. The question is that Manipur textiles are world famous now. Fashion designers in Mumbai are using them without respecting the copyright of people from Manipur. And this is because people are so ignorant about indigenous creativity in India. Can Kochi-Muziris Biennale position indigenous art and creativity at the heart of India?
Definitely. We believe in that. We believe in master craftsmen coming from different regions, different schools of practice. We organize in our residency. This is one of the things. Craftsmen, bringing great craftsmen from folk to carpenters, or all kinds of creativity we bring together to learn, practice it with contemporary young generation of practitioners and thinkers. We believe in that. It has to be juxtaposed together. It cannot sustain without, understanding the past to remain in present. I believe it's very important to respect the indigenous, the past, the memory, the muscle memory, maybe in
muscle memory. Yeah, that's so a great phrase.
Yeah.
But there's a clarification here, Bose. There's a clarification from a colleague from Manipur. They're actually talking about what in Australia, when we talk about indigenous, we talk about Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander. So they're talking about tribal people in India, the indigenous people. Their art and creativity is being exploited in big cities. That's because there's no appreciation of the value of their creativity. Can Kochi-Muziris Biennale take a lead on this in the future?
We are a small organization. We wish to, we have people come from Manipur as, mediators, in our Biennale. We try to give opportunities for each and everyone. We are a very small institution in that. I don't want to call it institution. We are in the making of such thing. I am interested in academics like Ute. I am interested in people like coming like that to our organization. Younger generation of practitioners. Those level we are looking at it. Definitely, we try it on our own best way to bring them on stage. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bose. Ute.
Yeah, just to come back to small, small actually, Kassel in Germany, where another cinquennial takes place, Documenta, has only 260,000 inhabitants. So so I think small has advantages, because what I also saw, for me was very amazing in Kochi, when I was there for the first time, is how many locals go, how many normal families with kids, and you run into. I was running then in a colleague from Harvard, Juliana Bruno, was standing there, and then on the same time there were lots of local people, and I think that is, to me, that was a very big winning point also for Kochi, that it addresses also the locals, that there is not this barrier. This is now something international that is now not accepted. People just came full of curiosity, and that brings me to Istanbul. I mean, Istanbul also has, the last Biennale, I think, had close to 500,000 visitors. That is definitely not possible with COVID and with social distancing. And we also think Biennales also have to be safe places for people to visit. And what I think, what we wish very much is that we can create an intimacy so that people also can really talk about this experience they went through. As I don't know who spoke from Turkey. Yes, Turkey is of course experienced in protests, and I mean that Gezi Park, and the university is going through a lot of upheaval, and so it's not like that a Biennale brings more upheaval, but I think sometimes we need also a calm space and a space for relief and for reflection, and where we get encouraged maybe by people from elsewhere that they had similar experiences, or they can give you something. Sometimes you look back in history. Biennales don't always need to be completely contemporary. What we learned also in Sydney, I think the traditions of indigenous people, like in terms of healing, in terms of communicating with each other in a different way, I think there's a lot to learn. And what I hope that we really physically can go to Istanbul, and the artists are really wishing this, like, because they want to have this exchange. They don't want to just like hear via a screen what is the city like and then send something. They wish to have this encounter, so we might have to work with a much smaller group and then allowing these more personal encounters, and it might mean smaller audiences.
Thanks, Ute. Gina, you want to add?
I was just wanted to ask Ute, you know, we were talking about slowing down before, and, you know, that kind of slow time for conversations. You know, do you think we need longer lead time to these events where those conversations can actually really be extrapolated out, and, you know, actually taking on some of those First Nations ways of actually building knowledge and communication, which is really slow. It's actually about, yeah. And what do you think?
Totally. I think it's just that this is, I said, like muscle memory. Of course, you don't want to replace other institutions who have programs year round, you know, so, but I think this to getting familiar with the topics that a Biennale brings, like having a possibility to slowly get familiar also with the curator. Where are they coming from? What is their perspective? Then like maybe a few artists, a few projects that come earlier, you know, like so that it's not like all on, there's the opening and then there's a symposium and like, you know, then you miss it. And so I think de-stressing, I agree, Gina. I think to also, I think it's wonderful in Venice. I often try to go, not at the opening. I mean, to the opening we go because we meet everybody, but I don't see much at the opening. But then to go back and really enjoy being almost with yourself or with some friends and discussing what you see. And, you know, so this, I think to slow down, I mean, the pandemic, I think also showed us the qualities of a slower pace. Like, you know, like having time for longer conversations, not, oh, Friday, I'm leaving the city, or like I have my next appointment. Suddenly people have more time. And there comes back a quality and an intensity that also is impactful. And I think if we can allow Biennales rather to be quantitative, but rather being impactful, I think that would be really to the benefit of everybody.
Yeah, I like what Bose said. It's 365. Kochi-Muziris Biennale, and you can go anytime when something is happening, you know, sort of, which is all part of the whole Biennale Foundation work. And I think Bose is just, are you there, Bose? No, he's taken a little break.
No.
He's changing shirts.
Oh, yes, I see. You look great in the new shirt. No, but Bose, is this something you started off with, or is something that evolved, this 365 approach to the Biennale and the whole process?
It's always a kind of improvising from the site itself. I believe that it is important when I have started a gallery in Bombay, it is important to have a cafe or a restaurant next to it, and also a bookshop, exhibition area. You know, it's a small, I mean, in the center of Mumbai, there is a commercial gallery, you know, but I would like to create something like that. You know, I believe that, you know, when we were discussing those period of time, I like European football, how European football is, you know, they buy the best players. The same way I would like to wanted to create a situation that, you know, the best people come to India and mix with local great minds, or, you know, you find the local talent. So I think. I don't know where I'm going. You know, your question, I lost. What was your?
Yeah, you said it's incremental. So when I asked whether 365 started right from the beginning,
Yeah,
is
like
it something?
for example, I believe that, you know, programming is one of the most important things. The new ideas, new programming. You know, look at all the museums. You know, they are adapting contemporary with the tradition. They're bringing fashion to the sites of Met, all these kind of stuff, you know. So I think it is important to adapt new ways of bringing different verticals. You know, for example, our ABC started as a kind of art by children. We started as a children's biennale. The next year, we felt that education is important, so we sent out in 100 schools, you know, experts to perform, you know, and educate kids for 3 to 4 days. Then later we realized, in 3 to 4 days doesn't work, you know. So you created a art room for 10 schools. So every step we are learning, and now in this pandemic period, we have this family engagement with, you know, family webinars, you know, with kids. So it's ABC Art by Children with dad, mom, kids, you know, sit together and or interact, and, you know, like we have a fantastic person called Blaise Joseph works on it. The same way students Biennale, nowhere else in the world, I think we are also, you know, we work more than 55 art colleges all around India, and, you know, from SAARC countries also we worked. So I think these associations, building up verticals, it's really important when it comes to creating new spaces. Residency, how you conceptualize. I really love R.M. Caesar's residency programming. You know, like that's small, but, you know, there is a new ways of adapting things, bringing up interesting people into smaller places and thinking big. Or, you know, there is a plateau for you know, sharing. You know, that I think Kochi Biennale is one of the most important aspect, is that in new verticals, every time we invented music of Muziris, art by, you know, art and medicine. There is, you know, outreach programming. All those things are important in this year-long program, and international exchange with international institutions. You know, Montpellier, we work the students visiting from Montpellier, and, you know, working in 1 month in Kerala, you know, during the time beginning of the Biennale. And also there is a kind of exchange. We would like to send our kids from Kerala or India to Montpellier and experience 1 month. But we could not do it because we don't have the funds to send them by flight. You know, so there are limitations. This organization got in financial limitations. We have ideas. You know, if there is money, we could do magic.
Yeah. Well, I think that while there are a couple of questions and comments, while the physicality that all of you, I mean, Uta has called it physicality, all of you agree with that, is critical. The kind of hybrid model that's evolving becomes important. That's the comment, because not everybody can make it to the site. And you ask PhD students, they'll tell you that they're doing an analysis of Biennales and Triennials. They can't get to all the places, but you know, in the digital domain, they access on the web page. Now they can participate. So I think there's a kind of hybrid model that's evolving. So that's just a comment. But here I have, is it from Mexico or Paris? Where you just that I think we need to, you know, the question is, can we reinvigorate cultural organizations to position, you know, sort of cultural rights and advocate for creativity and diversity in Biennales and Triennials? That's from Mexico.
I think ownership is very important, like that communities and places see an ownership. I mean, I mentioned Kassel before. I mean, like Kassel was not always pro-documenta, even if it's a very small city. But at one point also the Pride came in, like to be the host, to host these people from all over the world. Or like, I mean, I remember with Okwi, like every store on the street, like knew him. They were running out and said hello when he passed by. And so I think that a place has a chance to feel ownership of a Biennale, I think is very important, because that brings the pride and that brings out this hospitality. Again, I don't want to hear sing a song for Bose, he can do that himself, but I remember when we were there, Bose, at the second Kochi-Muziris, you said like the people were painting their houses because they wanted to look good. So like, so they really made sure that the streets look good, and because all these international people are coming. So it brought also out a moment for the city to get ready, like for something festive. And I thought that was so also touching. And then of course, each of the restaurants, of course they get international people then also by this, but then also they would tell about the food they have. And so, and I think this kind of, that goes beyond this, why I said the physicality has something that we cannot replace. And that, again, Gina, I'm all for it. I mean, we couldn't be together here without the screens and certain things, seminars and films. And so they go very well. Actually, music events, they go very well online. But this ownership, I think that's something we can only achieve through a physical presence.
Yeah, you're mentioning about people painting their houses reminded me during the third KMB, just before I went there, or was it the second one, Bose, when I did that cultural mapping workshop in David Hall, sorry. What was really interesting is they were having this state conference of bed and breakfast. It's an association of bed and breakfast places of the state. It was massive, it was big. So I just was curious. So I went in there and I met the president. He said that, no, we got the Kochi-Muziris Biennale coming. So we're discussing how we can actually promote bed and breakfast business and the kind of hygiene, the kind of standards they have to maintain for people that are coming. So that sense of ownership, again, like you mentioned, you know, sort of among the local people is just incredible. Gina, do you want to add something? Because I can see you, you know, you give away when you got ideas.
No, I'm fine. I just reiterate that, you know, it's as you said, it's a hybrid model. You know, I agree with you, Ted, that physicality, that experience on the ground is irreplaceable. You know, technology could never replace that. But it's a blend of moving forward that I think. And it's just, as I said before, it's going to take a bit to get that balance right. And, you know, we're going to make mistakes along the way, but I think it will be a more rounded visitor experience in the long run. But yeah, no, you can never replace that physical on the ground experience.
Yeah, we need to soften the muscle memory. I love it to muscle memory. And yeah, no, I think Gina, next time, I know you live in Metagong, and next time I'm in Sydney, which will be May. If you're around, I will organize, we get together with David Throsby. And he's very good at telling that a qualitative survey could be done within a short period of time. It's a question of the methodology. And what's really interesting is that the first 3 cultural institutions to do qualitative case studies, on cultural economics, are the British Library, and Scottish Galleries and Museums of Scotland, and believe it or not, Gina, Toowoomba Cobb & Co Museum. And, but in all the 3 cases, a simple question that was asked is, well, if the British Library was not funded, would you support it? Or if the government were to give, £1 extra in the annual budget per head, would you support it? Or if they took away £1 a head away from it? And the same kind of analysis was done by Dr. Deborah Tranter. She was the deputy director for the state. She did a PhD with me on this. And what was amazing is that the local people got so upset that the Cobb & Co Museum, might get less funding. Just the survey itself, the qualitative survey, that the premier, Anna Bligh, came, gave $8 million to turn this on. And then local community people who had never been to the museum gave $26 million. Because this is our museum. This is our Biennale. I think, Bose, a lot of us feel that way about KMB. This is our Biennale. We as Indians, we feel very strongly, although I'm an Australian, I can say that. And I think this ownership continues to be, coming to the center again and again. And I still remember 1984, when I was appointed in Australia. I was the first ever colored person in the Australian cultural sector. You won't believe it, from what Gina is saying just now, about the Sydney Biennale, how much Australia has transformed. That's because of sharing, learning from each other. And I think the last KMB, Bose, we had 2 Aboriginal artists from Tasmania exhibiting at the KMB. And I like to see, advocate, for more cultural exchanges between Indigenous people and new forms of creativity between not just India and Australia, but, the rest of the world. I think that, Uta, one of the things that Oakwe...
We have an exchange tie with Australia. Our artists were supposed to go to Australia, but an Australian artist visited our residency, 2 of them from Adelaide. Ace in Adelaide, we have a tie-up with, there are some other international institutions also we have tie-up. And yeah,
Adelaide would work because you now got Rana Davenport as the director of Art Gallery of South Australia. I still remember Rana as a very young woman doing research for the first Asia Pacific Triennial of Contemporary Art in Brisbane with Doug Hall and Caroline Turner. And Rana will be fantastic. She loves KMB. In fact, on Instagram, she's been saying what a great webinar this is. So, but also, I think that Bose, you would be, Lydia Miller for 20 years was the executive director of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Arts Board of Australia Council. And she's just retired, and there's a new person called Francisco Cobillo from Northern Territory who's been appointed. Francisco Cobillo has been to India on occasions. She brought, before she was the head of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Art at National Gallery of Australia till last month. She brought an exhibition from the National Gallery to the National Gallery of Modern Art. and she also went to Indira Gandhi Rashtriya Manasangrahalaya in Bhopal. So they are, you know, I think Australia Council for the Arts, in fact, at the last KMB, you had the Director of International Engagement. I met her there at KMB.
We showed Blue Country too in our show.
Yeah, and there's a very strong interest in India. For whatever reason, I'm not going to say this, it's recorded in public, that Australia is rethinking and looking at India in a very, very significant way.